You! Stop right there! This corridor is restricted. What do you think you're doing here?
Hey, you! Stop right there! Captain Michael Carter shouted that down the hallway of Central Military Hospital when he saw a black woman in simple civilian clothes stepping through one of the doors. Aisha Bennett stopped, turned slowly. She held a folder of documents under her left arm. "This hallway is restricted," he announced, crossing his arms about 6 feet away from her, taking on the posture of someone used to people backing down immediately. "Unauthorized personnel have no business being here." "Good morning," she replied calmly, without stepping back an inch. "My name is Aisha Bennett. I work at this hospital." "You work here?" Carter let out a short, humorless laugh. "And what exactly is your role?" "In nursing," she said. "Nursing." He repeated the word with that particular tone of someone not asking, but judging. "And you think you can just walk into a clinical corridor without visible credentials, without a uniform, without any identification on display?" "My identification is right here," Aisha said, slightly opening the folder. "You can put that away." Carter made a wide, dismissive gesture, brushing off the document without even looking at it. "The rules here are clear. If you're new, you should have gone through the main entrance like everyone else. This corridor is for medical staff and leadership. It's not a passageway for just anyone who shows up with a folder in their hand, especially you, dressed like that." That last sentence made people start paying attention. Across the hallway, Sergeant Paula Mitchell, who had been cleaning the glass of a medication cabinet with a folded cloth, stopped completely. A resident walking by with a stack of charts slowed down without meaning to, staring at the floor with that forced concentration of someone pretending not to listen while hearing everything. "I understand," Aisha said, without changing her tone at all. "But I can assure you I'm authorized to be here." "Assure me?" Carter tilted his head slightly, as if hearing a joke he expected to be better. "You walk in here in street clothes, no visible ID, without checking in with administration, and you want to assure me of something?" "I checked in with Major Daniels this morning," she replied. "He's expecting me." "Major Daniels." Carter repeated the name with a pause, long enough to make the doubt obvious. "And why would Major Daniels be expecting a nursing assistant who shows up in a beige sweater with no badge?" Aisha didn't answer immediately. She held his gaze for 1 second longer than necessary. Not with hostility, just with the presence of someone exactly where she was supposed to be. "I'm not an assistant," she said calmly. "Then what are you?" "Registered nurse, specialized in trauma, field medicine, and healthcare management." Carter exhaled through his nose, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. "Very good. Trauma and field medicine." He stepped forward, entering her personal space without permission. "Then you should understand that military hospitals run on strict protocol. And protocol means you don't walk through a clinical corridor like you own the place. It means you go to the front desk, get a temporary badge, fill out the log, and wait to be called by the supervising authority. That's basic. Or did your specialization not include administration? And I seriously doubt you have the specialization you're claiming. Just look at you. Like you'd make it that far in anything." "Captain," Aisha began. "Dr. Carter," he corrected, raising one finger. "In here, you call me doctor. That's basic, too. Not something you learn in any specialization manual." She took a breath, almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Carter, I appreciate the explanation of protocol, but I need to reach the administrative office, which is in this corridor for a scheduled meeting." "Not today," he said, and there was a sharper cruelty in that simplicity than in any raised voice. "Today you go back through the main entrance, register, and wait. If you're actually authorized, the system will confirm in a few minutes and someone will come get you. That's how it works." "I have a 9 o'clock meeting." "Then you're late." He checked his watch with a theatrical motion. "It's 8:47. By the time you go back, fill out the form, wait for the system to validate, and get called, it'll be at least 9:20. The meeting will already have started." She said nothing. "Unless," he added, lowering his voice into that false politeness, "you'd prefer to make things easier for everyone. The medical team is just arriving for shift briefing. They could use some coffee. You know where the break room is?" The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. At the far end of the hallway, Sergeant Paula Mitchell briefly closed her eyes. "I do," Aisha replied. "Good. Go ahead, make coffee for the team, and then we'll sort out your situation afterward." He turned away as if the matter were closed. "And put that folder away. Don't leave materials lying around in clinical corridors." He walked down the hallway without looking back, his white coat moving with the rhythm of someone used to having the final word in every conversation he chose to start. The resident disappeared quickly through a side door. 2 staff members resumed walking and turned the corner. Sergeant Paula stayed by the cabinet, cloth still in hand, looking at Aisha with a mix of genuine discomfort and recognition. The expression of someone witnessing something wrong but not authorized to stop it. Aisha stood in the middle of the hallway for a moment, folder in hand, eyes fixed where Carter had disappeared. Then she turned toward the break room. The break room was at the end of the side corridor, a small space with a beige granite counter, 2 industrial coffee machines, and shelves of standard stainless steel mugs stamped with the hospital emblem. Aisha placed the folder on the counter, filled the machine with water, and added the coffee grounds with quiet precision. Each movement controlled, efficient, as if this were just another task in her day. Sergeant Paula entered while the coffee was still dripping. She was a woman with short, graying hair and a firm expression. A veteran, visible even in how she carried herself. She stopped at the doorway. "Doctor?" she said quietly. "Sergeant," Aisha replied without turning. "You don't have to do this." "I know." A pause. "But doing it now is more useful than creating a confrontation that will cost time I don't have." Paula stepped further inside, arms crossed. "I can stay here with you," she said. "You can." Aisha turned slightly. "How long have you been at this hospital, Paula?" 11 years, ma'am." "And Captain Carter?" Paula hesitated. 4 years. Came in as a clinical physician. Took over morning shift coordination 2 years later." Aisha nodded slowly, as if fitting the information into something she had already begun mapping. The coffee finished brewing. She arranged the mugs on a tray with precise movements. "Who else is in the shift briefing?" she asked. "Dr. Harris, Lieutenant Owens, 2 residents, Ethan and Dr. Clark, and Ms. Carter from the night nursing shift, who hasn't left yet. And Major Daniels?" He called, said he'd arrive closer to 9:30, had a meeting at Central Administration. Aisha lifted the tray with the mugs and coffee pot. She glanced once more at the folder on the counter, and left it there. "Thank you, Paula." The sergeant stood still, watching her with that expression that was difficult to name precisely. It wasn't pity. It wasn't admiration. It was something more complex, like someone watching a storm forming on the horizon, knowing there is no way to warn it in time, but also knowing the storm doesn't need warning. Aisha Bennett walked down the hallway with the tray, reached the meeting room door, and entered without knocking. 5 people were seated around a long table covered with charts and printed papers, conversations stopping when the door opened, and 6 pairs of eyes turning toward her. Dr. Michael Carter was standing near the whiteboard with a marker in his hand. "Ah," he said, without hiding the tone of someone who had just received what he had asked for. "The coffee's here. Leave it on the table, please." She placed the tray carefully. As she did, Her eyes landed for exactly 3 seconds on the open chart at the far left end of the table. An admission record, bed 7, overnight entries. She didn't need more than that. "Is this patient receiving propranolol?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the chart. Ethan, the young resident with thin glasses seated closest to the chart, looked at it, and then at Aisha with the expression of someone who had just noticed something important that had been sitting in his blind spot. Dr. Carter lowered the marker slowly. "Excuse me," he said. "The chart," Aisha indicated with her head, without pointing. "Bed 7. Systolic pressure has been at 102 since 3 a.m., and the prescribed medication includes propranolol. Those 2 data points together require urgent review." "You read a patient chart?" Carter crossed his arms. "It was open on the table. I didn't need to touch anything." "That's restricted clinical documentation," he said, stepping toward her. "I understand what a chart is." "Then you understand that a coffee assistant is not authorized to comment on medical prescriptions." The sentence was delivered slowly, each word placed separately so the weight would land fully. Ms. Carter, from the night nursing shift, closed her eyes for half a second. Lieutenant Owens became completely still in his chair. Dr. Clark, the other resident, looked away, toward the window, toward anything that wasn't the center of the room. "I'm not commenting on a prescription," Aisha said, with the same calm she had brought from the hallway. "I'm pointing out an inconsistency between 2 pieces of data on the same chart. Ongoing hypotension with a beta blocker prescribed is a combination that needs to be evaluated. That's not an opinion. That's clinical data." "Any professional—" Carter suddenly raised his voice, making the mugs on the tray vibrate slightly. "Did you hear that?" He turned to the table as if presenting a scene to an audience. "The woman who brought us coffee is now giving me a lecture on clinical pharmacology based on someone else's chart she glanced at without authorization." No one laughed. No one agreed. But no one spoke either, and that collective silence carried the weight of people choosing not to get involved, not out of indifference, but out of fear of what happens to those who do. "Look." Carter lowered his voice to a tone of false patience that was sharper than the shout. "I understand you want to be useful, but there is a place for each kind of usefulness, and this isn't it. You were very kind bringing coffee. Now be even kinder by going back to the front desk, regularizing your registration, and leaving clinical decisions to people who spent 6 years in medical school and another 4 in residency. Understood?" He turned his back. "Someone check bed 7 after the meeting," he added in passing, as if the idea had just occurred to him. Ethan looked at Aisha for exactly 1.5 seconds and said a great deal in that time. She met his gaze with nothing but calm attention, then walked toward the door with the same composure she had when she entered. The door closed behind her with a click that carried no force but a lot of weight. In the hallway, Sergeant Paula Mitchell was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, waiting. "Doctor," she said. "Is Dr. Harris arriving?" Aisha asked. "He's coming through the side entrance now. Should be here in 2 minutes." Aisha walked to the window at the end of the corridor. Outside, the hospital courtyard was beginning to fill with the movement of the morning. Patrol vehicles parking, personnel entering with the determined pace of those who already have their day organized in their heads. The flag raised on the central mast with the rigidity of something that doesn't bend. It was a clear morning, the kind that doesn't have enough clouds to justify hesitation. From inside the meeting room, Carter's voice came through muffled but still intelligible in fragments, isolated words that passed through the wall as if it were made of something more porous than concrete. "Credential. Protocol. I don't know where they find people like this." Then something lower that didn't carry clearly into the hallway, followed by a single laugh, isolated, without echo, which in itself was a form of judgment. Sergeant Paula crossed her arms tighter. "He does this often," she said. It wasn't a question. "I read the nurse's reports," Aisha replied. Paula blinked slowly, as if processing information larger than she had expected. "You read internal reports from here?" "I spent the last 4 weeks reading this hospital's documentation before taking the position," Aisha said, with the same natural tone of someone describing routine. "Staff reports, transfer records, satisfaction evaluations, formal and informal complaints. It's the minimum necessary to understand where you're arriving." Paula looked at her longer now, like someone deciding how much context to share with someone who had just revealed she already had more context than expected. "Nurse Claudia requested a transfer in February," she said. "She had been here 7 years, left without official explanation, but everyone here knows what happened during the shift briefing the week before. He interrupted her 3 times in front of the residents, said her observation about a patient was guesswork from someone who hasn't spent enough time in books." "Her name is in the report," Aisha said. "I'm not surprised," Paula replied. "She was the best we had." "And what did you find?" "Exactly what I'm seeing this morning," she said simply. Before the conversation could continue, the side door at the end of the corridor opened, and an older man entered with the steady step of someone who knew every inch of that place by heart. It was Dr. Harris. White coat impeccable, gray hair neatly trimmed at the temples. The kind of doctor who needs no introduction, not because he is arrogant, but because everyone already knows him. He looked down the hallway, saw Sergeant Paula, then his eyes settled on Aisha. And he stopped completely. The first spark had already ignited in the break room when Sergeant Paula had addressed Aisha as "Doctor." 1 syllable more than expected for someone bringing coffee, a form of address that doesn't match someone serving, but someone with authority to receive respect. Captain Carter had ignored it, because it was more comfortable to treat it as a mistake than as a fact. The second spark had come with the chart. A coffee assistant does not identify the interaction between propranolol and hypotension in 3 seconds of reading an open chart. A trained resident would take twice the time and consult protocol. But Carter had dismissed that too, because recognizing competence in that woman would require revising a decision he had made in the first 30 seconds of the hallway. And Captain Michael Carter was not the kind of person who revisited decisions made in the first 30 seconds. Now it was Dr. Harris standing in the corridor, looking at Aisha with an expression that left no room for ambiguity or alternative interpretation. "Lieutenant Colonel Bennett," he said, and the title landed in the hallway with the clarity of someone who is not being informal nor overly formal, just precise. "I wasn't aware you were arriving today." The title settled in the air, as if it needed space to be absorbed. Sergeant Paula lowered her head slightly, with a small, contained smile, the expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. At the far end of the corridor, a staff member stopped working for a full second. "Dr. Harris," Aisha Bennett replied, extending her hand. "My flight was moved up. I came straight here." "Still in civilian clothes, then," he said, shaking her hand with the genuine satisfaction of someone meeting a professional he respects. "Is the appointment already formalized?" "Major Daniels has the original documents. He should be arriving shortly." "Excellent." Harris glanced down the corridor with the quick assessment of someone used to reading environments. "This hospital is going to benefit greatly from your leadership. Your reputation in D.C. arrived before you did, and it's a strong one." "You're kind," she replied. "I'm precise," he said, with the confidence of someone who knows the difference. They spoke for a few minutes in the restricted access corridor, the exact place where Aisha had been told she was not allowed to walk. Sergeant Paula Mitchell stood nearby, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone patiently waiting for the next act of something whose ending she already knew. When the external access door opened again, Major Daniel Daniels stepped in. 50 years old, dark hair with gray at the temples, uniformed with the precision of someone who had never relaxed standards even after decades of service. He crossed the lobby quickly, turned into the corridor, and spotted the group: Aisha, Harris, and Paula. "Lieutenant Colonel Bennett," he said, quickening his pace with visible relief. "Good to see you've arrived. I just called the front desk looking for you." "Major Daniels," she replied. "My apologies for the delay. The meeting at Central Administration ran longer than expected." He handed her the folder he had been carrying. "Here are the original documents. Yesterday's order, signed by Regional Command, and the formal assumption of command. The ceremony will be next week, but as of today, you're already in position." Aisha opened the folder calmly. The documents carried the U.S. Army insignia at the top of each page, and the name that appeared across all relevant lines was the same: Lieutenant Colonel Aisha Bennett, Chief of Nursing, Central Military Hospital, Eastern Command. The effective date was today. Dr. Harris glanced over her shoulder and nodded with satisfaction, as someone confirming something he already knew but still appreciated seeing written. At that moment, the meeting room door opened. Captain Michael Carter stepped out holding a patient chart, wearing the expression of someone stepping out briefly to print something and return in 2 minutes. He walked down the corridor without looking around, turned the corner, and stopped abruptly when the group appeared in front of him. Major Daniels, Dr. Harris, Sergeant Paula, and the woman in the beige blouse, the same woman he had told, less than 20 minutes earlier, to go make coffee for the medical team he supervised. Carter stood frozen for a second that felt longer than it had any right to. His eyes dropped involuntarily to the open folder in Aisha's hands. The Army insignia was visible even from a few feet away, and he recognized the format instantly: appointment orders for senior officers. Insignia. Name. Rank. Position. "Captain Carter," Major Daniels said, with a neutrality more revealing than any tone shift. "Good timing. I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Aisha Bennett, our new Chief of Nursing." The chart in Carter's hand lowered slightly. His lips parted, but whatever he intended to say never made it out. "Lieutenant Colonel Bennett arrived this morning directly from Washington," Daniels continued, with the calm of someone explaining out of necessity, not courtesy. "That's why she wasn't in uniform earlier. We were expecting you, Captain." The last word carried the weight of what wasn't said. "We were expecting you," meaning there was a correct procedure that had been ignored. And the person who ignored it was not the woman in the beige blouse. Carter looked at Aisha. She returned his gaze with the same calm as before. The same calm she had when he blocked her in the hallway, when he cut her off, when she served coffee. A calm that was not submission, and never had been. Ethan, the resident, had stepped out behind Carter and stood a few feet away, watching with the expression of someone actively reprocessing everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes. "Captain," Ethan said carefully, aware of the tension, "I checked bed 7. Blood pressure dropped to 98. Medication needs immediate review. The attending physician has been notified." Carter closed his eyes for a second. The clinical data he had dismissed as interference had just been confirmed. In front of Major Daniels, Dr. Harris, and the woman who now held authority over nursing operations across the entire facility. "Proceed with the review immediately," Aisha said to the resident, her voice unchanged. "Document the time of the first indicator and who made the initial observation." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, with formal clarity. The resident moved quickly down the corridor. Silence followed. Aisha closed the folder calmly. "The formal transition meeting is scheduled for 9:15, she asked. "Yes. Conference room, 2nd floor, Daniels replied. "Good." She checked her watch. "We have 12 minutes. And she walked toward the stairs. At 9:13 a.m., the conference room door opened, and Aisha Bennett entered with the folder under her arm. She walked the length of the room without hesitation and sat at the head of the long table covered in documents and coffee cups. Captain Carter was already seated, 4 chairs down, left side. When she entered, his eyes followed her movement, then the chair she took, then returned to the table in front of him with the unmistakable expression of someone realizing, in that exact second, the full magnitude of a mistake that cannot be undone. Major Daniels sat to her right. Dr. Harris sat beside him. Lieutenant Owens, the 2 residents, and Ms. Carter completed the table. Sergeant Paula entered last and remained standing near the door, as she did in every formal meeting, with something at the corner of her mouth that wasn't quite a smile but came very close. "Good morning," Aisha said, opening the folder. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Aisha Bennett. As of today, I assume the role of Chief of Nursing at this hospital. Before we begin the formal agenda, I would like to address a review I conducted over the past 4 weeks as part of my preparation for this position." She slid a document to the center of the table. It was a report. 12 pages. Dates, names, records, signatures, with key sections marked in red. The silence in the room was the kind that comes when everyone present realizes, almost at the same time, that what's being placed on the table carries far more weight than the number of pages suggests. "Over the past 4 weeks," Aisha continued, "I reviewed staff transfer and resignation records from the General Clinical Unit over the past 2 years. During that period, 18 professionals requested transfer or resignation. I spoke directly with 12 of them. 11 reported the same behavioral pattern." Dr. Michael Carter did not move. "Public humiliation during shift handovers," she read, her finger pointing to the first line of the report. "Orders issued with inappropriate language in front of patients and families. Systematic interruption of clinical observations made by nursing staff members, including in situations involving direct risk to the patient. And in 2 documented cases with date and names of those involved, comments about professional competence that were explicitly associated with the racial background of the employees." Major Daniel Daniels looked at Carter with an expression that had lost all bureaucratic neutrality. Dr. Harris looked down at the table. Lieutenant Owens, who had been sitting beside Carter and had witnessed most of the morning in the corridor, remained completely still. "I want to make something clear," Aisha said, lifting her eyes from the report and moving them across the table. "This assessment did not begin this morning. These data were already consolidated before I set foot in this hospital today. What happened in that corridor was merely consistent with the already documented pattern. It was not the cause. It was confirmation. The sentence carried the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where she is going and does not need volume to get there." Carter took a breath and opened his mouth. "With all due respect," he said, his voice making a visible effort to remain controlled, "this assessment was conducted remotely, without direct access to the environment, without the possibility of contextualizing the situations. Telephone conversations with former employees who already left dissatisfied carry natural bias. This is not a valid methodology. The interviews were conducted via video conference with formal consent from participants, with audio recording," Aisha replied before he could finish. 3 of them took place while the employees were still actively working in this hospital, which eliminates the argument of post-exit bias. The audio files are indexed in Appendix 2 of the report, with partial transcripts in the cases considered most relevant. She slid another sheet to the center of the table. "This is the list of names, interview dates, and employment status of each participant at the time of the conversation." Carter looked at the sheet. His eyes stopped on 2 names he recognized immediately. 2 nurses who had requested transfers in the last 6 months, whom he had previously described, in informal conversation with Major Daniels, as difficult to manage and unable to adapt to the pace of service. "The monthly reports you submitted," Major Daniels said, breaking his silence, his voice now heavier, "described the nursing unit as stable, cohesive, and with a low level of conflict. That was my assessment of the environment based on what I observed directly, Carter replied. It was an assessment different from the facts recorded in the transfer requests that came across my desk, Daniels said simply. Ms. Carter from the night shift looked down at her hands. Ethan looked at the document. Dr. Clark remained silent. Captain Carter, Aisha said, and the second of silence she created before his name framed what followed. I am not here to destroy a career. I am here to correct a pattern of conduct that caused real harm to real professionals and put the quality of care in this hospital at risk. Those are two different things, and what I propose reflects that difference. He did not respond. What I will recommend to Major Daniels, she continued, is the following. Immediate removal from your supervisory responsibilities over the nursing staff, with full maintenance of your clinical duties, initiation of a formal administrative disciplinary process to investigate the documented facts, and mandatory participation in a leadership and professional conduct development program lasting 90 days, conducted by an instructor certified by U.S. Army Medical Command. Carter opened his mouth. That is, he began. A second chance, she said, before he found another word. One you did not need to give me this morning, and did not give. But one I am giving now, because I believe punishment without learning does not correct a pattern. It only changes where the problem appears. Carter looked at her for a long moment. There was tension in his face, but no longer anger. Anger requires conviction that one is right, and that conviction had left the corridor shortly after the insignia appeared in the folder. What remained was something else, closer to the discomfort of someone who has spent years building a version of himself that reality has just reflected back like a mirror, and the image is not the one he expected. You could have exposed me the moment you walked into the meeting, he said, and there was an honesty in that sentence unlike anything he had said before. I could have, she agreed, but I prefer solving problems to creating scenes. This hospital needs a team that works, not a public defeat that leaves resentment in the air for 6 months. The administrative process exists to establish facts. I exist to ensure the nursing department functions with quality and respect. The silence that followed had a different weight. It was the silence of someone without any remaining argument, without any posture, without any title functioning as a shield against what had just been said. Carter looked down at the table. Then, slowly, not theatrically, but with the genuine weight of something being processed by someone unaccustomed to processing it, he nodded. Major Daniels opened the minutes log. Major Daniels, please record the removal of supervisory duties effective immediately, Aisha said. Recorded, he replied. Lieutenant Owens, you assume interim supervision of the shift until a replacement is assigned. Yes, ma'am. And update me on the condition of the patient in bed 7 as soon as there is any change. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. The formal agenda was discussed with objective clarity. Shift handover protocols were reviewed and reorganized with a new structure that ensured minimum speaking time for each nursing staff member before session closure. Communication between medical and nursing teams was redesigned to eliminate the informality that had, over the last 2 years, become synonymous with poorly exercised hierarchy. Those present recognized, even without saying it out loud, that morning had established a different standard of leadership, more direct, and at the same time more human than what they were used to. Lieutenant Owens took notes with the attention of someone understanding, in real time, what leadership looks like when it organizes without intimidation. Dr. Clark asked a question about clinical documentation protocols that, in any other meeting with Carter, she likely would not have asked, and received a direct answer, without condescension, that led her to write down 2 additional points. Captain Michael Carter remained seated throughout the meeting, responding only when directly addressed, with the posture of someone learning, in that Thursday morning meeting room, a lesson no curriculum had managed to teach him in 42 years of life. The leadership development program to which Captain Carter was assigned was conducted within the hospital on Wednesday and Friday afternoons in a third-floor training room normally used for staff instruction. The instructor arrived on the first Wednesday with a thin folder, a bottle of water, and the posture of someone with no interest in making the process comfortable. Her name was Major Beatrice Anderson. She was 52 years old, with short white hair, 3 field service medals, 30 years of military nursing, and the kind of patience that understands patience is not the same as tolerance. She was black. In the first session, she placed clinical case studies on the table and asked Carter to identify the conduct errors in each scenario. All cases were based on real events in military hospitals. All names were fictional. Carter recognized the second case on the second page. He said nothing, but Major Anderson looked at him with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world. "Continue," she said simply. He continued. Sergeant Paula Mitchell received her promotion notice to Master Sergeant 2 weeks after Aisha's arrival. The document arrived by institutional email on a Tuesday morning, and she read it 3 times, sitting in the same chair, in the same room, before closing the computer and returning to work without telling anyone. There was no formal celebration planned, no toast, no meeting. But when Aisha walked down the corridor later that same day, Paula stopped and said, in the same direct tone she used for everything, "Thank you, ma'am." Aisha Bennett responded with a nod. "The system worked this time," she said. "That's the minimum that should happen." The hospital began to change at a hallway pace, the kind of change that has no opening date and no official ceremony, but that people first notice in the tone of conversations and then in the quality of the work. Shift handovers started allowing enough time for each team member to speak. Nurses' clinical observations began to be recorded in patient charts with the name of the person who made them. 2 professionals who had requested transfers because of the previous environment reached out after hearing about the changes and returned after a direct conversation with Aisha. On the Sunday following her first full week in the position, Aisha arrived at the hospital at 7 in the morning, dressed in simple pants and a t-shirt instead of a suit, not on duty, not called in. She walked through the inpatient wing with a cup of coffee in her hand and stopped at each bed where a patient was awake. She spent 5 minutes with a 73-year-old woman who was alone and worried about a test result. 5 minutes with a young soldier who had fractured his ankle during training and was restless from not being able to move. No more than 5 minutes, but no less. Ethan saw her in the corridor as he returned from an urgent call and greeted her with a discreet nod, without interrupting. Later that same Sunday, he posted a message in the internal medical team channel that most had read before the end of the day. Bed 7 review was done in time. Patient stable with no complications. The clinical data flagged in Thursday morning's chart was correct. He didn't need to write the name. Everyone already knew. Dr. Michael Carter read the message on his phone while waiting for the elevator on the 2nd floor, at the end of a Wednesday shift after his 2nd training session. He stood there holding the phone, staring at the screen for longer than the message required. There was something in that pause that wasn't just shame, although shame was there too. It was something harder to name. The kind of feeling that comes when someone begins, for the first time seriously, to understand the difference between authority granted by position and respect earned through conduct. It was the difference between a title used to close doors and a presence that opens them without needing to announce itself. It was uncomfortable. It was the beginning of something that, if he didn't waste it, could become the most honest part of his entire career. He put the phone in his pocket and walked down the hallway. And when a nurse passed him in the opposite direction carrying 2 charts stacked in her arms, he stepped slightly aside to give her space, without hesitation, without making it a calculated gesture. She barely noticed. But he did, and it was enough to begin. Sometimes the greatest lesson doesn't come from punishment that destroys. It comes from a chance that demands more than punishment ever would. And if you made it this far in the video, comment Colonel so I can leave you a heart. Share this to remind people that everyone deserves respect, and leave a like to support our work. Subscribe to keep receiving more stories like this.